I know people believe Oprah has the Sagittarius rising chart, but I remember when she was put down as Virgo rising for the longest time, and then some other rising sign. But now the general consensus is Sagittarius. So this comes from memory, according to Astro Dionist. Oprah was born at a time birth times were recorded on birth certificates. Why does this time have to come from memory? All I can tell you is the Sagittarius horoscope does not rectify, so I am going to talk about a chart that does. As usual, there is always the caveat that it can be wrong, but I don't think so. First of all, Oprah does not seem to have a Sagittarius rising personality. It's not exuberant, it's controlled. She has her dignity. She is regal, queenly. Yes, it's Leo rising. She looks like she has Leo rising. And the chart rectifies. Notice the ruler of the chart is part of a stellium in Aquarius in the people-pleasing seventh. Planets in the seventh, well aspected, make a person exceedingly popular. Planets in a sociable air sign magnifies that popularity. She was voted most popular in high school without batting an eye. Oprah started reading when she was 3 years old. By the time she was enrolled in kindergarten, she complained that all the kids did there was string beads and draw funny pictures with crayons. She was bored and protested by writing a letter to her teacher telling her she did not believe she belonged in kindergarten. Well, when you have a child eloquently writing you letters, when the school had not yet taught her how to do that, it's not surprising the teacher readily agreed. So Oprah was jacked up to the first grade. The school made her skip the second grade. Oprah was born in severe poverty. She did not own a pair of shoes until she was 7. Her parents never married. Her father was unaware of her existence until her mother sent him a birth announcement in the mail. Shortly after Oprah was born, her mother took off to Milwaukee in search of work. Without Oprah, there was no place for a baby where she went, so Oprah was handed to her paternal grandmother. Looking at the chart, Saturn is conjunct the fourth house cusp. She would have at least one strict parent. She called her grandmother Mama because she didn't want to be reminded her real mother left her behind. Her grandmother was a tough taskmaster in the area of reading, writing, and arithmetic and church study. Oprah said her grandmother could whip her for days and not even be tired. She was whipped with a switch until welts developed, and she was not allowed to cry.
But like so many parents of that era, caregivers of that area, particularly in the Black community, um, corporal punishment, whipping your kids, beating your kids was just common. It was, I grew up in a household with my grandmother. It was just my grandmother and my grandfather the first 6 years of my life, and I grew up under the auspices of children are seen and not heard. So me, Oprah Winfrey, not being heard in an environment where if you talk too much or you look the wrong way or you spoke out of turn, my grandmother would just turn and just thump me on the head. And many times she would save up the whippings for Saturday night when you were naked. And so I remember this morning, I had been asked to go to the well to bring some water back. And as I was bringing the water back, I was like playing with the water with my fingers like that in the water. And my grandmother was looking out the window. And when I brought the bucket in and I'm sloshing the bucket because I'm a little girl, and she's like, "What? Were you playing in that water? Did you have your fingers in that water? That's our drinking water." And I was like, and I said, "No, ma'am." And she said, "I saw you and your fingers in the water." So she, grabbed a switch and I got a really bad whipping for it. And later, when I put on my clothes to go to church, one of the welts from my back opened up and bloodied the dress. So my emotion now is not because I feel, such deep pain about it. I just feel pain for that little girl. I feel like now I know what it's like to be, you look at a 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old child and how innocent they are. And at the time, I just accepted it. I just thought, okay, I got a whipping. And that was one of many whippings. And, my grandmother is the kind of person, and I know a lot of people watching, you had this too in your family. You get whipped, then they'd be annoyed that you were still sulking about it. And she'd come along and say, you better wipe that frown off your face.
With her ruler in Aquarius, she was a rambunctious and difficult child, often rooted in wanting attention. But Oprah admitted she got whipped because she was very precocious and was always getting into trouble, and she thought she could get away with it. Her grandmother gave her chores. They grew everything they ate. They lived on a farm in a remote rural countryside. Her life was lonely. At 6, Oprah was becoming too much of a rebellious, rambunctious handful to deal with, so her grandmother sent her to her mother in Milwaukee. Her mother was ill-equipped to take care of her. However, her mother could qualify for welfare, having custody of her. 2 years later, Oprah was such a wild child, her mother passed her on to her biological father, who was now married. By now, Oprah concluded no one wanted her. She was a burden and constantly being shuffled from one guardian to the next. Oprah was now living with her father and his family. Saturn in the 4th gave her a father who was patient but extremely strict. One day, Oprah came home with a report card full of C's. Her father was livid. He told her she's capable of better, and if she didn't start bringing home some A's, she could no longer live with him. Now, her father was no slouch himself. Vernon Winfrey built up his own businesses, became a barber, a grocer, an elected councilman, and a deacon in a Baptist church. A disciplined, responsible man, he may have seen some of himself in his daughter, her potential for accomplishment mirroring his, which should be nurtured and developed. He did not want her coasting through school, frittering away her time, goofing off with the in-crowd. He tamed her wild soul, instilling discipline and emphasizing education as a means to make it in life. As smart as she was, she could get lazy about her studies and not try as hard because she could easily keep up with her peers. Her father made her hit the books and put her on a grueling study schedule. He gave her reading assignments and made her do book reports on them, this along with her schoolwork. Amazingly, rather than rebel, she heeded her father. Maybe it's because by being so strict and insistent she developed her mind, he was inadvertently giving her the attention she craved since she was little. All the time he put into reining her in showed he cared. The only attention she got from other caregivers was when she was being beat. Her father didn't beat her. Instead, he gave her a long, cold stare of disappointment. She soon brought in A's. There are many fascinating accomplishments by Oprah, starting at 16. As mentioned, she was voted most popular. She won class president of student council. She won beauty contests and garnered a job reading the news on the radio while still in high school. Oprah left her hometown for a job opportunity as a news anchor in Baltimore. Part of the job was to be put out on the street and interview people who were experiencing tragedy. However, Oprah couldn't handle this part of the job. She would become too involved, shed tears, complain the story was too sad for her to handle. Now, maybe this has something to do with Mars and the carrying forth. She couldn't be professional and distance herself from the tragedy. She would get too emotional. This didn't go over well at the station. She was fired. When interviewing on her talk show, Oprah doesn't have a prepared list of questions, but rather chats in real time about the issue at hand. Aquarius believes they are at their best when spontaneous. She's able to ask typical follow-up questions that the audience wants answered. 60 Minutes has done a piece on Oprah's phenomenal ability to extract information out of people they would not confide in their best friend, let alone confess on national TV.
And you criticized his sexual
He said,
competency?
what's wrong with me? And I said, you don't make enough money and you're not good enough in bed.
Tony!
I can't believe I said this on TV.
Well,
And this was live?
This was live, and she says, oh, you can just take that out of the tape, right? No, we can't. I say, we're live. And that's because people get very comfortable, I think. And the reason they get comfortable is because I am comfortable.
This is directly related to the stellum in her seventh, the instant rapport she develops with total strangers. And this was her edge over Phil Donahue. Now, what I would really like to concentrate on is this. When she was young, she wanted to be white, because white girls don't get beat. The reason I wanted to be white was that I never saw little white kids getting the whippings I got. You spill something, you get a whipping. You tell a story, whatever happens, no matter how small the indiscretion, you get a whipping. Sometimes you got them saved up. Mars in Scorpio in the fourth, square Pluto in the first, has a lot to do with the beatings she received as a child. Her parents would put up her 19-year-old cousin, 10 years her senior, who frequently visited. They put him in Oprah's bed because she had a bed to herself, whereas her siblings had to share a bed. Over time, he raped her. This was her childhood, along with other sexual abuses from other people over the years. She was paranoid of her grandfather.
So when I was a little girl, as I said earlier, it was just my grandmother, my grandfather, who now I know had dementia, who was just like a shadow in my life, like just avoid him no matter what. So I slept in the bed with my grandmother in a one-room bedroom that was also the living room. So there was a fireplace and a hearth and all of that. So this one big room that had the bed in it. My grandmother and I slept in the bed together. My grandfather was in a room on the other side of the wall. And one night in the middle of the night, my grandfather gets out of bed and comes into the room. And I wake up and he has his hands around my grandmother's neck. And she is screaming, Erlis, get off of me, Erlis, get away. And she's trying to force him off. And so instantly, you awaken in the middle of the night, I feel this fear and I can hear the fear in my grandmother's voice. And she manages to push him off of her and step over him. He falls, she steps over him and runs to the front door. I run out of the bed with her. It's pitch black in the middle of the night in rural Mississippi. And she goes out on the porch and she starts screaming, Henry, Henry. There was an old man who lived down the road that we called Cousin Henry. He was blind. And it's the first time we talked about this. Cousin Henry comes down the road in the middle of the night to help my grandmother get my grandfather up off the floor. And after that, my grandmother put a chair underneath the doorknob and some tin cans around the chair. And that is how we slept every night. So I think that's when I started sleeping on alert. I always slept with listening for the cans, listening for what happens if that doorknob moves, what happens if that chair moves. And so the message that was sent to my childhood brain is that you are not safe in your own home.
The beatings, the rapes, the petrified fear of her grandfather that continued on long after she moved out. We only see the sunny disposition of Leo rising on Oprah when she did her talk show. We're not aware of her own dark past that left its indelible imprint on her to this day. So we know Mars in the fourth had to do with her childhood beatings. How has this affected her as an adult? You see her in the Chicago housing project of Cabrini Greens lecturing young girls to avoid pregnancy and focus on their education. In 1998, she created a public charity called Oprah's Angel Network, in which $80 million was raised with 100% of donations, funding charitable projects across the globe. It helped establish 60 schools in 13 countries, create scholarships, support women's shelters, built youth centers. She built the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls in South Africa with Nelson Mandela's blessing. She created the Oprah Winfrey Charitable Foundation with Christmas Kindness South Africa 2002 initiative that included visits to orphanages and rural schools in South Africa where 50,000 children received gifts of food, clothing, and school supplies. 63 schools received libraries. There was no profit in any of these. There was no publicity angle. She did it because she cared. In this chart, you've seen Mars in the fourth on projects of caring for people, nurturing them, making them believe they mattered, something that had a huge impact on her young life. She can give that life-changing moral-building assurance back to others. So she has done well in this life. She could look back on it with pride. She has made the most that life had to offer, stood up to life's challenges, created her own opportunities, educated herself to the fullest. She is an inspiration to us all. That's all I got. See you in the next video.